You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans, as told to Mayor Emanuel.
This is Mayor Emanuel with Chicago Stories. We're honored to have today Jacky Grimshaw, who is Harold Washington's political director, intergovernmental affairs.
Intergovernmental affairs.
Right.
But yeah, I was kind of his political advisor from the time I was knee-high to a duck.
Yeah. How did you first meet him?
Well, he was part of Ralph Metcalf's organization. I lived in the 3rd Ward, 2 blocks from Ralph. And Ralph and I both went to Corpus Christi Church. And after 12:15 Mass on Sundays, a lot of Harold Washington's folks would show up. Sam Patch, John Strozier. They would show up there, and so I was aware of him. And at the time, Harold actually lived right on what was called South Parkway, and now Martin Luther King Jr. Drive, right at the end of the block. Corpus Christi was 49th and South Parkway, and he lived right at 50th and South Parkway. So, I would often see him, in the neighborhood. And, Harold, the same thing that happened when I was going to the grocery store to get food for my daughter's lunch. Harold would show up then. He was living in Woodlawn, but he had walked over from Woodlawn to Hyde Park, and so he was always walking places, so it was easy to see him somewhere.
Where was he in his political career at that point?
At that point in time, I'm not quite sure. I'd have to go back and look at the years. When I was a kid, he was probably in the state's attorney's office at the time. He was not an elected official.
So this is before the Springfield and Washington.
Yeah. No, this is when Ralph Metcalf was actually still an alderman. This was before Ralph went to Congress.
Wow.
I have a couple of years on me, so it was a while ago. But yeah, that's when but when I got involved in his political campaign was when he was running for state senate. And Committeeman James Bull Jive Taylor had a significant part of that legislative district. And he had put other people named Washington on the ballot.
To stop Harold?
To confuse the voters, that voters couldn't tell the difference between Harold Washington and Jerry Washington. But it was going to be a tough race because Taylor also didn't play fair in the political process. So a friend of mine who was working for Harold asked me to come in and help. At that time, I had a little bit of political experience. I worked in Linda Prade's campaign, Bob Mann's campaign, Abner Mikva's campaign, when they were
This
both...
is when Ab was down in the Hyde Park. Yeah.
Exactly. So
that was my first race.
Is that right, Ab Mikva's race?
Yeah, that's when I was a little. My mother ran precincts for him when he was running against Young all the time.
Right.
Right. Back and forth. Right.
Right. No. So having that experience, she asked me to come over and help Harold and do some strategy to, kind of counter what Jim Taylor was doing. And so that got me started with Harold, that Senate race, and I did every one of his campaigns after that.
Did he have the mayor's office in his eyesight?
I don't think so.
He parallel parked into that?
Yeah, that's a good way of phrasing it. No, in fact, when the whole push, the plebiscite and all the rest of that to find a black mayor, and they started going after Harold, we would talk regularly about what was going on, he was doing in the Congress. And he said, look, I am congressman for life. Why do I want to give up this to do that? And I said, Mayor, look, you've done as the Illinois General Assembly, Illinois Senate, the Congress. You may as well do mayor. What's the big deal? But then, he also talked about the awesomeness of the mayor's office. But he was, as you know, Harold was a reader. He was a student, particularly of history. So as he was pondering this, he talked to Mayor Dutch Morial of New Orleans. He talked to Mayor Richard Hatcher, former Mayor Richard Hatcher of Gary, and really to find out what was the difference between being successful as a black mayor, particularly in a non-majority black city, and what were some of the pitfalls, and what did he need to do? And that's how he came up with the demands to this group, that he wanted black registrants, voters, he wanted money, and he wanted the support of the black community. He gave them targets for each of those. And,
A true draft.
Exactly, a true draft. and they exceeded each one of the demands. I think it was 50,000 voters, if I remember correctly, and we ended up registering like 250,000. He wanted like 100,000 in cash, and we got more
let's
than
be
that.
honest, not in 20s.
No.
No. I got that. I just want. We don't want our license from FCC pulled here, huh?
No.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is that the drafting group
Right.
for Harold were so committed that every demand he made of them, they met and exceeded. So I said, look, you just got hoisted on the horns of your own petard,
Yeah.
like.
You can't send the bogey and they hit the bogey, man.
Exactly.
Is it?
So-
Now, I've read once, and nobody's ever told me this to be true or not true, and so you're the only one. Did he actually go to Dan Rostenkowski at that time and try to encourage him to run? Pre all the drafting and all that?
Well, if he did, he never told me.
Okay.
He tried
I read that one.
He tried to get Rich Newhouse to do it.
Uh-huh.
He tried to get John Strozier to do it.
So he really went around the community, everybody but him.
Yes. He was trying to satisfy the community and not be the one to satisfy the community. But everyone turned him down. But so
So he was at the altar alone, huh?
That's right. He was standing there all alone.
Okay, so it's obviously the infamous council wars. Is he thinking at any moment during any of those battles, like, what did I get myself into? And blame you and everybody else for getting him into this because he was a happy congressman?
That's right, congressman for
life. Yeah.
No, I never heard that kind of frustration. Harold was a boxer in high school. And that gave him that, he had that fighting spirit, that determination. And so, the more, the Verdoli Act 29, tried to put up barriers, his thing was how do we get over it, around it, under it, but he was not going to be crumbled by it, So if he was frustrated, he kept it to himself. But, all the times I dealt with him, both in City Hall here, as well as, he had his little kitchen cabinet. We'd meet on Saturday mornings at his house. And it was always about strategy. What do we do? And it was strategy about the city, not about the council. But, we went through the issue, what do you do with CHA? I went through the issue, what do you do with what was then the dock and canal that became, the whole river revitalization.
Right.
That thankfully you are continuing to make the river an important part of the city. But it was those kinds of things that we focused on when we had those meetings.
Mission-driven ideas.
Oh, absolutely. And so the council was. It was like it's a necessary evil.
Kind of like the in-laws.
Exactly, it was a necessary evil. You had to deal with those guys, but it never stopped him. He, as I say, if he was frustrated, he never showed it. He never said anything about it.
Now, I'm a young Turk here at that point, but my understanding is whenever he made the decision, he never looked back. He was all in. It was not like he didn't get up into like knee deep in the water.
He didn't second guess himself.
Once he said yes.
Right. Because, he would think things through. So, and he was always 10 steps ahead of us.
Where do you think that came from? Because it's not, it's not, I knew he was a book reader, but it's not a book skill. You know what I mean? There was something, he had a thumb on the pulse that he could be both in the moment and around the corner, look around the corner. Where do you think he got that?
My husband and Harold would talk a lot, and I would kibitz. As we were just
just as a normal language, kibitz. Everybody on the South Side kibitz.
Actually, there are a lot of examples.
Jackie, you don't have to explain. That was a free shot on goal. I took it.
No, but my husband and Harold would talk a lot, and because my husband was a political scientist, so he was trying to get into the mind of Harold as well. But Harold, no matter what the situation, in some ways he always came back to his father. His father was a tremendous influence on him. And a lot of the paths that he took was either because of his father or because of what happened to his father. So I don't know if that gave him part of that insight you're talking about, or if it was just part of the strength that he had. But he never wavered once he understood, once he figured out where he wanted to go. And that's why negotiating with the council on budgets, negotiating with the council on GO bond issues, negotiating with the council on who was going to be the financiers of bond deals, all those contracts and things like that.
That doesn't go on these days. I want to be really clear about that. Okay.
But he was intent, like even on those bond deals, is that he was about not taking things away, like the whole fear in the campaign from the white community was that Harold was going to be elected, and everything that had been the spoils,
going to get reshuffled.
Exactly, was going to go to the black community. Now, Harold was intent about having the black community cut in, but not at the expense of somebody else. So he insisted that there were black investment bankers and financial advisors and things like that. But it was on a competitive basis. I mean, he didn't have his favorite investment banker and say, hey, give it to Rahm Emanuel. He would say, let's have a process that we would look at the best people for this job. And so, in that way, he did include the black community, but he didn't do it as a way of excluding anybody.
I want to go to two things. One is, I always thought, this is now as a student of political science, that he was in a battle, and because his demeanor was always cheerful with that smile, that people took the warmth of him, his magnetism, was his political strength and strategy and message in the end of the day. You can talk about any topic, but it never seemed to wear on him. And that was probably the most powerful thing, because people were taking his measure all the time.
Right.
And even in this quote-unquote battle, 29 versus 21, council wars, etc., he was the happy warrior. I mean, did you guys ever talk about it like that, or am I just like sitting back looking at it that way?
Well, no, we never talked about him being the happy warrior, I mean, in that sense, but in the sense that it was just, maybe I just, by the time we got to the mayor's office, had so much experience with him that I understood him. For example, when we won the election for him to go to Congress, I mean, we were jubilant and happy. That was a race he was running against his best friend, John Strozier, the son of Ralph Metcalf, his mentor. We had a battle. So we were happy as can be because we won, didn't have to have a runoff or any rest of that. And he's sitting there gloomy. I said, Harold, what's wrong? He says, he elected me, but I got to go to Congress with Ronald Reagan as president. And that's what, I mean, I hadn't even thought about the presidential, but that's him, right? I mean, it was not his race, but what was the environment that he was going into. So, that 10 steps ahead, there he was, gloomy as can be, as we're all excited because he had to go and work with Ronald Reagan. And we did battle Ronald Reagan, right, on a variety of issues. And my first trip around the state of Illinois was because Reagan cut back on the revenue sharing, right? And so Harold got a coalition of Illinois mayors. I mean, we were going to places and they had never seen a Chicago mayor before, and they were just as jubilant. In fact, I remember the mayor of Peoria, he came up to Harold's funeral because, it was the first time that a Chicago mayor, I mean, you guys are important for the rest of the state of Illinois, right? And they had never seen a mayor of Chicago before. But we put together this coalition and we battled Ronald Reagan. But anyway, you asked me a question about the happy warrior. You get me started on Harold, Mayor, and I tell you.
Do you buy that he was a happy warrior?
Oh, he
Short of his election night for Congress, where he was depressed, but do you buy that the demeanor was at quality?
Absolutely. No, it was just the charisma that he put out there, right? And so no matter if you were mad at him, if you didn't like him, you had to, you recognize the charisma of this guy.
Give me, what do you think, when you look back for you, having sat in your shoes in different offices, and you look at for him, what was the high point of the mayoralty either for him or for you, or both. And then what would you say was the low of the low?
Wow. That is interesting. There were so many high points that we had.
Well, what's your fondest memory?
Celebrating Chicago's 150th anniversary, 50th birthday was one of the fun times.
Why is that?
Why? It was the history of the thing, right? Here, this city has been around for 150 years. Here it is that John Baptiste DuSable was the founder of the city of Chicago, and on his birthday, here was Harold Washington, an African American, just like John Baptiste DuSable, celebrating, that milestone, and so it was, I guess, just the juxtaposition,
the poetry of it.
Right, that I can remember. But there were so many things. One of the fun things, what the Bears Super Bowl, the Fridgerettes.
Yes.
The Fridgerettes.
85.
Right. Oh my gosh, he had such fun dancing with the Fridgerettes in New Orleans at the Super Bowl. And so it was things like that. I remember we went out. I'm a sports fan, so forgive me. We went out to San Francisco for the year before, when the Bears were in the playoff, the divisional playoff with the 49ers. We were guests, actually, of Mayor Feinstein at the time. And Diane, right. And she and her husband, they treated us very well when we were out there. But he talking about happy, right? We thought we were going to, win. We got trounced, man. It was terrible. But, he thanked Mayor Feinstein for her hospitality, and we got on the plane and we came back with our tails between our legs, right? So, there were so many
Since you're a
fun
sports
times.
fan, let me ask you this question. I hate to get you into government. How worried were you guys when the Sox were talking about leaving?
Oh, yeah.
So
it
was Harold Thompson, Governor Jim Thompson, and you have the Sox.
Yeah.
I wasn't going to go here, but since you're a sports fan, you must be intimately involved in this.
I was. That's when I got to know Jerry Reinsdorf and Bill Wirtz, and I didn't know that Bill Wirtz I had an apartment across the street. He told me I can come over and take a nap anytime I wanted. I like that. But no, we were very concerned about that. And, that was, again, getting the General Assembly to provide the funds for building the new Comiskey Park.
Right.
Now it changes names every year. I can't remember. Guaranteed rate, yeah. But so that was not only Mayor Washington and Governor Thompson, but it was also Speaker Madigan, and I think it was it Phil Rock at the time? To get them on board with it as well. So,
for the bond deal and holding them here and building.
Absolutely. No, but we did not want the Sox leaving. We were Sox fans. We were Southsiders.
No, it would have been I'm well aware. That would have been a black eye. You can't afford that black eye. Now, having gone through this, so let me ask one other moment in time. Harold had a teacher strike. Now, that time, the school's CPS wasn't under the mayor. But I also remember he got. I don't know how he pulled off getting out of town, man. But I give him credit for that.
Listen,
because I was considering it too.
I was a teacher. I was a member of CTU, intergovernmental affairs, my responsibility.
Right.
Harold was doing the Asia trip. I was scheduled to go to Asia with him. The strike happens. Am I in Asia? No. I'm on Pershing Road. And then we had this 12-hour time difference. So
was there any consideration of canceling the trip?
No, because he said, go over there and handle it.
I know how you feel.
Oh, man.
Because I was supposed to be on a trip with Clinton to China, and he goes, you're going to stay and handle. And all right, I said, well, tell me how the Great Wall is. Will you send me a postcard? I got it. I'm with you, Jackie. So so you were here?
I was on Pershing Road.
On the other side of CTU?
As
a card-carrying member?
CTU, as a card-carrying member of the union. And here I am liaisoning between the teachers and the board and trying to get them to...
Who's chair of the board at the time?
Oh God.
Sorry for doing that.
Yeah, man, you're really testing my memory now.
Well, you remembered all the details of the socks thing. I'm trying to get to the teacher's piece.
No, I was pissed off. So I was just nervous about the socks deal.
Right.
But the teachers really got my emotions going. I'm supposed to be in China.
Yeah.
I had wanted to go to China since I was a Girl Scout. The Girl Scouts, they had this competition, or it wasn't really a competition, but they had these international trips. And so when I was, I don't know, 10, 11, the place they were going was China. And it was it came down to a contest between me and my best friend. And she got to go to China, and I didn't. And
So this was your second almost trip.
a second almost
Have you
trip
made
to
it there
China.
yet?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
I went to Beijing. I can tell you about the wall. But the thing is, I get to the wall, it was a cloudy day out, man. So it's like, I have to go back and see the wall on a nice sunny day. But yeah, so getting the teachers and the board on the same page was difficult. We were going almost 24 hours. It was just hard lines that they both had, and actually it gave rise to the thing that I was working on for the mayor the year at the time he died, and that was changing the relationship of parents and teachers and Board of Ed. And so I was working on pulling together this parent summit, I think, or educational summit is what Harold called it. And so that was my big job at the time.
Let me switch. I try to ask you this one thing on the. What do you think Harold will be remembered for?
I think fairness.
Fairness?
Yeah. He preached fairness. I mean, he was going to be fair to you whether you wanted it or not. And so everything that he did was was about how do we move the city forward in a way that was inclusive, that didn't meaningfully leave people out. And so out of that, you just passed the budget, right?
Rumor has it.
Rumor has it.
That's why I got the rubber look in my eyes, man. Yeah, those are always, man.
Right. Well, one of the things, we came in with a huge deficit.
Right.
And it was.
I know that.
You remember that.
Been there, done that. Groundhog Day. Got it.
So we had this huge deficit left over from Jane Byrne, and the way the budgets had been done is that it had been a black box. Nobody knew what it was, what was in it, and the tradition had been that the staff and the mayor's office produce a budget, they give it to the council and say, pass it, right? Nobody knew what the hell was in it. So Harold changed that, right? And he moved up the date so that the preliminary budget got to the council in October with plenty of time for aldermen to look at it, for the community to look at it, for people to know who was there, what was in it. And not only that, but then he made us go out to the community, right? We had these all the commissioners and staff, we'd be lined up at these big long tables, and the community would come in and demand things of us and beat us up and throw spitballs at us. No, not really. But, that whole process.
No, that's kind of close to reality. The spitballs are becoming snowballs now. That's the only difference.
Being transparent and open, so that people were part of the government. That was one of the things that he wanted. He wanted the
More
residents of the city of Chicago to own their government, right? And so you can't own something unless you know what's there. And so I think that's part of his legacy. I mean, you're enjoying the same budget process in a way that he started. I think also inclusiveness, right? So we had all of these commission on Asian Americans and Native Americans and older women and whatever. But again, it was a way of including people in their government, and so I think fairness and openness and transparency, I think, is part. And as much as you'd like to go away from that, not that you would, the resident city of Chicago will not let you change some of those things that he put in place, because now it's part of the culture of the city of Chicago.
You said one thing about. You called inclusiveness. I talk about it, both inclusive economics and then a shared future. That if you don't get to that place where everybody feels like they have a stake in the future,
right?
Not only the politics, the economics, this is basic kind of city is not going to function. And given you had Chicago in a transition, this is a transitional moment from technology, globalization, et cetera.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost become harder to try to create that. That's why the few things we have, like parks and otherwise, are kind of key to still having that kind of shared future, shared space, and shared sense of community.
Right.
But it gets harder, though, when your politics, given the 29-21, I don't mean to come back to council, is trying to actually pull that apart while you're trying to pull it together. So,
so the thing is that you had a little experience of that working for President Obama, right?
Yeah, I was a young man then.
Before you got the gray hair, I got it. But
yeah, my daughter always says, you can call it salt and pepper, but you're very heavy on the salt, Dad. So
I understand. Me too.
Right.
But the same thing is that when you have a recalcitrant legislative body and you're the chief executive trying to move things forward, right? And so that thing is that you have to figure out a strategy to get around it. President Obama did a lot of executive orders, right? As a way of dealing with it. With Harold, we didn't have executive orders, but we did have he did have the ability to put in place programs that would bring people into the city. That's what he used the CDBG budget for, as a way of getting funds to communities that had been denied things under previous administration. So, and we fought the community development block grant budgets were as big a fight as the city budget because of the way he was using the CDBG.
Is there a dark moment, a low moment where you guys were in there one late night and like, how are we going to get out of this? That you can...
Man, I was mentioning President Reagan. One of Harold's big fights with that administration was with Samuel Pierce and CHA.
Okay, yeah.
And they were the Pierce decided to hold up funds from the city, and that included the CDBG funds, right? And so the question is, one, a lot of the apartments were just crap, man. We did a tour of some of those apartments and buildings, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. So we needed to reinvest. We needed to provide that. And at the time when we were recognizing that people are really living in horrible conditions, Samuel Pierce tried to take funds from the city of Chicago. And, it was like a personal thing, right? When you go out and you see people living in these conditions face to face, it's not something that's theoretical. It's not something like, do we have money to build another building or even to build a river walk? I mean, it was like, these are people's lives. And the harshness and the callousness, I guess, of someone saying, because of politics.
Right.
It's kind of like the sanctuary city thing that's going on with the current administration and you, right?
We just like to say that we beat them in court so far. No, I know. They're using that money to kind of coerce policy, man. It's crazy.
Yeah. So that was, and I guess it tugs at me because there are real people there, right? It was not, a theoretical or infrastructure. These were people who were suffering, and, this guy, bless his soul, was trying to make things worse. And that was pretty bad. We went through lots of battles.
Before we started doing the interview, Jackie, you said this was the first time you were back in the office since his mayoralty.
Yep, that's true.
Eerie? How'd it feel?
Well, I'm glad it's different. It looks different than when he was here. If I walked in and it looked the same way, I probably would not have come too close. But you rearranged it, you've changed it, so it's a respectful office, right? So it's not that emotional tug that if it looked the way it did in 1987, I would have a hard time.
You know him from state's attorney, state rep, state senator, congressman, mayor. Which is his favorite position in public life?
Oh, I think being mayor.
Yeah.
How can,
It's not even close.
Yeah.
I always tell people.
Yeah. I mean, you do the same thing. You were in Congress, right? And you're now a mayor. What do you think?
Listen, I tell everybody this. This job, and I think I've had pretty good jobs in public life, this job is better than Chief of Staff, Congress, and Senior Advisor all combined. If you put all three of those together, all the strengths of all of them, they don't hold a candle to this job. It's the greatest job.
He loved this job. I mean, he would complain.
It's funny because that was the only office he was reluctant to run for.
Exactly.
And he loved it more than others. Ladies and gentlemen, the Chicago Stories, we are honored to have Jacky Grimshaw, not on the show, but back in the office.
I'm happy to be back in the office.
We don't have any door gifts when you walk out, though. We got a lifesaver out here. Okay. Jacky, thanks for coming back. Thanks for sharing those stories.
All right. Thank you for inviting me. I love talking about Harold. So anytime you want to reminisce, compare things, I'm happy to talk
the one thing
about
I'm out of this is if I do make that trip to China again, I'm inviting you. This time you can make it.
Right, and the thing is that we have to go.
I have a sneaky suspicion you'll go on that trip, and my part will get canceled. I'll have to stay behind and do something. All right, Jacky Grimshaw, have a great Thanksgiving.
Thank you. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
Thanks, Jacky. Thanks for being here.
You're listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Emanuel. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet your guest ideas using #ShyStories. Thanks for listening.